Hello, folks. My name is Alex Johnson. I'll be your moderator today. I'm with Verity, and congratulations to making it to the last session on Tuesday of your Water Week. I'm really excited about this. We've got a really great. Uh-oh, just one second. I've got some tech issues. I logged into our session to make sure that I could get questions, and now my computer is talking to me. Yeah, I'm talking to me. All right, back at it. So really excited about the group today. A lot of us have worked together, as you'll hear, predominantly in WASH, drinking water delivery, although we'll also touch on some other adjacent water resiliency project types, and then how all of those can or already do connect to climate finance. So we're excited to have you all and everyone online as well. Would like to get a show of hands just so the group here kind of knows who we're speaking to. And certainly this will be hopefully an energized last session of the day, and one where we're really hoping for some audience engagement as well, both in the room and online. So would love first to understand the segments of the global water sector that we have in the room. So would love if you could raise your hand if you are an NGO working in water, climate development. Quite a few. Welcome. Any government agencies? Welcome, great. Multilateral donor organization like World Bank, UNICEF? None. Any research or academic institutions? Welcome. Private sector, tech, consulting, etc. Great. Finance. Anybody? Finance. All right. No finance, kind of some finance. Great. And then any community organization implementing, local implementing partners for any project types, a couple of those. Great. And then how about geography? So anyone working in Africa? Quite a few. South or Southeast Asia? Okay. Latin America and the Caribbean? A number. Great. Middle East and Middle East, I guess. Yes, yes. Europe, couple in Europe. Great. And then how about folks that are working all around the globe? Quite a few. Great. And then lastly, who's already working on projects that that have a climate finance connection? Who's already in the climate finance space? About half the room. Excellent. And especially of those, who feels confident explaining how carbon markets work to their colleagues? All right, none of those. Perfect. We've got a fertile field here. Excellent. Well, you see the names here on the screen. I'm going to ask our panelists to self-intro themselves, just so they do a better job than I would. So please, if you could kind of go down the line and in less than 2 minutes, kind of give a little bit of your background and who you're working for.
Great. Thanks, Alex, and welcome, y'all. Thanks for joining. My name is Laura McDonald, and I am wearing two hats today. I am the managing director of the Mortensen Center at the University of Colorado Boulder, and then also the International Carbon Programs Director at Verity. And my background is in water and sanitation, but through both hats that I wear, I increasingly focus on large-scale project management and logistics.
Thank you.
Yeah, good day all. I'm Keith Wright, the CEO of the Millennium Water Alliance, which is an alliance of 27 member NGO, tech, and business organizations working on water security and resilience issues. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I'm Christina Barstow. I'm the Director, Water, Food, and Climate at Helvetas. We're a Swiss nonprofit organization. We work across a lot of sectors, but also in the water space. We're also a member of the Millennium Water Alliance and have partnered with Verity and the University of Colorado for our carbon program in Madagascar, which I'll talk about today.
And my name is John Simon. I'm the managing partner of Total Impact Capital. We're an impact-first investment firm. We focus on financing access to basic human needs like health and water. In the water sector specifically, we have opportunities we've helped develop in Central America, in East Africa, and we're looking at working with Millennium Water Alliance and Verity on something we'll talk about today, which is a pooled carbon facility to support a multiplicity of opportunities across the world.
Thank you so much. And as I said, my name is Alex Johnson. I'm not only your moderator, but I also get some slides. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Verity, and I do various other things. I'm also a pear farmer back in Oregon in the United States, and a couple other things as well. But I'm excited to be here. I have a long history in especially water quality markets, and then have moved over to Verity about 3 years ago. Really excited about the opportunity to really blend carbon finance with some of the most innovative water technology and water market strategies. So jumping in, and welcome everyone that just showed up. The only thing you really missed was some introductions, and you'll get to know everybody as we talk. So here's your program. We have an hour and a half, as I'm sure you're very aware by this time in World Water Week. And I'm not going to be too stringent on the presentations. They should be 5 to 7 minutes or so. So about half the session we'll be hearing from our panelists, and then would love to hear from you, especially any clarifying questions about what you heard. And then we will switch into kind of panel mode and discuss amongst ourselves. And certainly we'll try to keep it engaging and keep kicking it back to the audience. So thanks for being here. Hopefully it's very informative, and we're excited to begin. And that's a funny slide because I already did that. All right, over to you, Laura. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. And I'm endeavoring to be your favorite presenter by keeping it under 5.
Ooh.
I'm going to lay the groundwork. I'm not going to try to answer all your questions in this presentation, but let y'all know who I am, what I do, and what kind of questions you can ask me so that we can better have a conversation. So as I said, I am here wearing 2 hats. I will say that our colleague John Eklund was not able to travel due to visa issues. And so when I'm speaking to the Mortensen Center and our research there, if I'm not able to answer a question, it will be because John is the expert in that. And then I will also point you to a session tomorrow where our colleague Whitney will present on our sensor technology that we're developing. But at the Mortensen Center, where I'm the managing director, and who is also a partner of the Millennium Water Alliance, we combine education, research, and partnerships to support thriving communities and environments. And this is a collaboration that's important both to the Millennium Water Alliance, but what we're talking about today as well, because we partner closely with Verity. In fact, I partner closely with Verity in my role in Verity to ensure that we are layering academic research and rigor onto the carbon finance work that we're doing. And so Verity itself, which Alex will dive into deeper when he presents, more broadly is a project developer and implementer who's leveraging carbon finance to reach millions of people with new, sustainable, safe drinking water. Keith will also touch on these projects and the umbrella approach that we're taking, but briefly, these are the projects that are currently up and running and are in the process somewhere between validation and verification in carbon financing through the gold standard. And so you can see we have projects with Helvetas in Madagascar, Asili in Bukavu in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Verity is an implementer ourselves in Rwanda. And then we work with LifeStraw Kenya and the Millennium Water Alliance Kenya on implementation of carbon financed programs in Kenya. And these all have a range of capital that has been invested to make these projects possible. They weren't started reliant on carbon finance. They are made possible, and their expansion is made possible by the anticipated carbon credits. But I do want to highlight that these funders were critical to launching these projects and making it possible to have the on-ramp and the time to then generate the carbon credits to feed that revenue back into these projects. So the way that we collaborate is by considering the geographies that we're in and the amount of data collection that's required to meet gold standard requirements. That was an opportunity for Verity to work with the Mortensen Center to leverage that data collection to go beyond meeting the reporting requirements to exceeding them, and using that as an opportunity to have a body of evidence that builds confidence in the credits that we're generating, that our partners are generating, and that are being brought together through our work with the Millennium Water Alliance and Total Impact Capital with Helvetas as a collaborator. We're also working to develop innovative technological and analytical solutions for monitoring and reporting. And so this includes the sensor development that Whitney will present on tomorrow for strengthened digital monitoring, reporting, and validation. And that helps increase accountability, transparency, and therefore, we hope, enhance credibility of the water-based carbon credits. And then my colleague, John Eklund, has been doing research on novel monitoring parameters for quantifying the benefits outside of conventional emissions accounting, and also reviewing the data that we collect on the effectiveness of these interventions on improving water quality to look at their effects over time and the influences of climate variables on water quality around the world. And so briefly, I wanted to highlight how in each of these projects we're layering in some of our research. So in Amazi Meza project in Rwanda, we have been piloting the sensors that are monitoring E. coli in real time. And we've also been working with the WISE scale to pilot the institutional water insecurity experiences scale to help them go from pilot to finalizing that tool so it can get to the point of being easy to plug and play like iWise and HWise currently are. In Kenya, we're similarly piloting the sensors and also have incorporated HWise into that. And then across these three projects, currently, the research that we're doing is looking at water quality, the impact of these interventions, and the influence of climate over time. And with that, I'll hand it over to Keith to dive in a little more.
Thanks. Hi, all. Again, Keith Wright with Millennium Water Alliance. Great to be here with you. Anyway, inside joke. So this statement on this first slide notwithstanding, we believe that climate finance has important potential to finance, build, and sustain safe water results in respect to all of our missions. And we'll talk about why it's difficult and how we're achieving that. But we believe that to achieve that potential, going this alone is very inefficient. There's a lot to learn. Even those of us familiar with climate finance, how we explain it to our colleagues. So as Millennium Water Alliance, we're thinking about how can we lower the barrier of entry, and we believe that scaling fast is really important in this space. And we'll talk about some of the capital for that as well. So carbon finance is difficult. So let's just put that out there. For a lot of for new participants, it can be a little bewildering. It can be like, this looks really interesting. But what projects, with what types of treatment, there are a lot of things to figure out. So it can be a little bewildering, even though it attracts a lot of interest. It requires expertise, not just in how to generate carbon credits. Once you have that asset, it doesn't mean much until you can sell it. So there's a need to develop a market strategy, especially in a soft market. Speaking of which, it's a soft market right now. It was a lot better just a few years ago. Will it be better in a couple years? So, kind of finding expertise and collaboration across that whole value chain from the details of generating carbon credits to marketing those at scale is something we're trying to address across this group here. It can be a really expensive mistake. And you could spend a lot of money to find out, whoops, these interventions aren't going to generate sufficient carbon credits to make it worth it. So let's start with that. It is difficult. So why be involved? If it's difficult, if it's expensive, if it's challenging, if the market's soft right now, why bother with this? We started looking into carbon finance a few years ago, really primarily from how do we solve the long-term O&M challenge. We build beautiful systems. What happens after 5 years, 10 years? And that took us to carbon finance as a hypothesis. Could ongoing revenue from sustained uptime and clean, safe water provision generate sufficient revenue over 15 years to keep those same systems running? Like many of us, we say, wow, this looks really interesting, and the closer you get to it, you realize how challenging it can be. But the potential for this is, we believe, really exciting. To really do, frankly, better work. To generate carbon credits, you have to prove you've delivered safe water at the point of consumption. A lot of other donor programs don't require that, which is making us think about water treatment that can be sustained and afforded, and a lot of positive incentives to keep systems running over the long term. So it's really, I think, elevating our game. Which is welcome, but of course also providing a financial engine for many of the things that have been elusive for our sector. We talk about spare part value chains and all these things, but if there's not revenue in that system, things don't move, and even using sensor data to affect repairs. So we're excited about the many positive incentives within that system, as well, of course, CapEx or project revenue to do the work we want to do. So it is difficult, but we believe it's really worth it. A few things. So as Millennium Water Alliance, for those of you who don't know, we're 27 member organizations, NGOs, research, tech, business. So we have this diverse collective skill set and broad reach. So part of what our role is as Millennium Water Alliance is to look for solutions that are beneficial to the sector, drawing on the expertise of our members. And that's taken us to a pretty exciting inflection point as we look at carbon finance, look at ways to raise debt to grow those. So a couple of things we're working on. One is together figuring out the best practices and how to do this. So not just trying to figure it out one organization at a time, but together trying to figure out how to do this well. We heard from Laura about a scaling umbrella approach, slightly different projects and methodologies, but putting those under one umbrella of projects, which takes us to the market side where those can be bundled as high quality credits and taken together to the market to people who believe that these are high quality projects, high quality credits with verifiable data and high co-impact. So there's a lot of benefit, again, to scale and quality, but not going it alone. We'll talk more about the market side, but the bundling of that is important. Small is not beautiful in the climate finance space. It requires volume to get attention of the right sorts of buyers and have the high enough quality to push what's a soft market a little higher. And as a skeptical market comes around to convince them, these are legitimate, great things to be involved in. Another thing we've been working on is we are hosting the Global Technical Working Group on climate finance. So we had our first meeting last month. It's open to non-members as well. So if you're in the room and want to be a part of that, you'd be welcome to. And it's a group of experts around climate finance. The first task of work has been informing some gold standard reforms that we believe would be helpful to the sector. And finally, we'll hear from John Simon on something else MWA is supporting, which is to raise capital funding. In the year we've all experienced, the traditional grant funding is not what it was. And so we're hoping to raise between $20 and $50 million that could be used to fund high capability projects. So if we do these interventions for this amount of money, these will be the carbon credits as a result, and that can pay off the debt and continue expansion in O&M. So that is where we are as a group, and we can take questions as we go forward. And we've seen this map, but again, and this is just the beginning. We think we're already in discussions with other members who have potentially high quality projects that could be added to this. So this is a first step, but these I believe will be somewhere in the range of 3 million credits by 2030 with these 5 projects alone, which is getting to some interesting scale. Some resources if you need access to them, and I believe Christina.
Cool. Thank you, Keith. I've been asked to speak about this kind of world of carbon credits from an organization where it's become a brand new topic, a brand new thing, and how it's being integrated and kind of those opportunities and challenges. And this has been really interesting for me. I've kind of worked with these folks at Verity in 3 or 4 past iterations of Verity, whereby 10 plus years ago, some of the first carbon for water projects were implemented. And so it's been a really interesting journey for me to introduce this to a new organization that doesn't have a ton of familiarity and really try and see what the challenges are, where it can be integrated, what kind of internal messaging we need to work on in that way. I'm going to reiterate a few things that Keith said, and probably not as eloquently as him, but I'll do my best. So very quickly on Helvetas, if you've never heard of us, it's a Swiss nonprofit organization, and just very quickly, our mission is really around dignity and security. But the other part of our mission is really about environmental resources in a sustainable manner, and that's where this carbon piece, I think, really speaks to our vision and our mission. We work in over 30 countries. About 12 of those we have water projects in, mostly in the East Africa and Southeast Asia region, but a couple in Latin America. And we don't just do water. We do programs across a variety of sectors, including food, nutrition, climate, education. We do a lot of governance work, migration work. And so I think that's relevant in that, again, we're not just in the water space. This isn't just a water conversation for Helvetas. We have other carbon credit projects in other work as well. So it's important to kind of think of it a little bit more holistically at our organization. Great. So quickly on just kind of like what were the opportunities for Helvetas as we started to bring this in, and what were the challenges? So on the opportunities side, there was a real potential for us to layer it into already existing programs. So the programs that we've introduced carbon finance in Madagascar is an already existing program that is grant funded. One of the things about the water sector as it relates to carbon, for those of you that are really familiar, is additionality doesn't apply in this space. So we can actually do this layer it into a grant-funded program. And that's really important for us because that kind of de-risks a lot of the program. We know to a certain extent it's funded, and so this allows us to fill a different funding gap, not the capital expenditures, but the long-term maintenance ones. And Keith touched on that, but we really do see carbon revenue as a long-term source of funding for maintenance, which in our experience is really hard to get funding for. We have a lot more success, as I'm sure a lot of you do, in the capital expenditures part of the work. And we still do have some gaps there, but this gives us this kind of long-term maintenance stream. Again, as a large nonprofit, diversification of funding streams is really important to us. This allows us access into the private sector partnerships. They're obviously the folks that are buying the credits. So we kind of have a new area and a new ability to meet with those partners. And then also Keith touched on this as well, but programmatic quality, there really is a lot of incentives to have high quality within these programs. And the methodologies around carbon credits are really rigorous. So Keith touched upon one, which is point of consumption. So there is water quality monitoring at the point of consumption. That's very rigorous, as most of you all know. There's also an entire audit stream where you have surveying, you have an auditor come, there's a lot of random sampling, and it incentivizes continued usage and continued quality of programs. And for us as an NGO, we don't have a lot of those requirements, frankly, from a lot of our funders, or even the governments that we work with. So it really does incentivize higher quality programs. And then we also really like that this program does highlight co-benefits. So like I said, there's this environmental piece that I feel like we often lose the storyline of with a lot of our water projects. We're not just talking about water, we are talking about this kind of environmental work and how it relates to a lot of these other sectors as well. And then, but obviously there's challenges. So the first thing I'll say about that is Helvetas is a Swiss nonprofit. We're a very conservative organization. We don't take a lot of risks. To be honest, I am not Swiss, I'm American, so I'm allowed to say that. And then I work at a Swiss organization. And so it is, in order to kind of build this into the organization, we did spend a lot of time doing a lot of internal communication in order to get the trust that was needed to work with this program. So a few things that kind of came up during that process. The first one I would say kind of falls into this bucket of reputational. So we've all heard about greenwashing, and it's been applied to the carbon sector quite frequently, but it's been kind of this broad criticism of all, it can be made into a broad criticism of kind of all carbon projects. And so we've spent a lot of time internally talking about which projects, may be using a greenwashing mentality and where we can provide high quality of services and where we can build trust and be honest about what it is that we're doing. So I think that's really important. Again, as a very conservative organization, we have a lot of folks that are really concerned about that. Suppressed demand, which we may or may not get into later, but I won't define right now, can be a controversial topic. It is less controversial than it used to be, but it is still can be a sticking point for folks on carbon work. And frankly, there is a little bit of distrust in the private sector buyers. So we at Helvetas have a pretty thorough due diligence process on anyone we accept money from. So this does open up to a large range of private sector buyers who could be from a lot of different industries. And so we do have to really weigh those, where the money is coming from, and that's an important part of any private sector industry. Keith also touched on this, but program size, there is a minimum threshold for viability. Viridi kind of tells us around 50,000 users per year. And so that does, even at a very large NGO, that still restricts us. We only have 2 or 3 programs, frankly, within our portfolio that are really serving that many people. So as you consider perhaps looking at carbon finance, it's really hard unless you have these large enough programs to make all of this investment worth it. And then with that said, one of the most difficult things is having that expertise like in-house to actually run these programs. There is a lot of work to do on registration and auditing and all of this paperwork that goes into this. And that is one of the reasons that we are working with Viridi, because as a program developer, we can, share that risk. We can share all of those costs and revenue at the back end in order to make that much less risky. But it wasn't worth it for Helvetas to get into this sector we would have had to hire at least 1 full-time FTE to just go through the process. Finally, uncertainties are a lot. This takes a long time. If you decide to start a carbon program, you're looking at 12 to 18 months minimum before you're gonna really have revenue. And so you as an organization, it was hard for me to convince my organization to say we have to invest a little bit of money in this and we're not gonna see it for a year and a half. And again, with the current times that we're in, that's a pretty difficult story. And then I won't speak about this for too long, but the carbon price is volatile. Keith talked about that. And so again, hard to say, I hope the price will be this in this amount of time. We think it's gonna look like this. This is what our revenue could look like. And of course, at a very conservative organization, we're gonna take the most conservative revenue values. And those don't look as good as a carbon price that is more bullish. So yeah, thanks a lot.
I'm actually gonna jump in front of you, John.
No problem, Alex.
It's the big arrow. Got it. All right. So just touching on Viridi, a couple folks have already spoken to this, but giving you a slightly more fleshed out picture. So Viridi is interesting. It is a climate startup. We have completed a Series A, I think $8.5 million raised roughly, but it's kind of an old startup. So it's a decade old, although the Series A, which has really accelerated our work, is about 3 years old. Originally, we were really focused on the sensor technology, which we still have, which in climate lingo is DMRV, digital monitoring, reporting, and verification. And that was really focused on the water outcomes, right? There's a lot of technology quantifying carbon benefits, but specifically for Viridi, we are a water company first that just happens to have a long history in the carbon markets. And so our founder, Evan Thomas, who couldn't be here this week, is back in Boulder, but was one of the original co-authors for the UNFCCC a long time ago, 17 years ago, for the methodology which is now on the gold standard, which most of these folks are talking about, which basically quantifies the climate benefits of delivering and maintaining drinking water supplies in rural developing nation contexts. So 17 years is a long time, and especially in a fairly nascent still carbon market. And Viridi, in its current iteration, has really been working to not only scale wash and drinking water programs, but also start to diversify our own portfolio into other water resiliency project types. And so one that I won't go into detail because it's quite complex is watershed restoration in developed country applications. So the US and the EU. We've done a ton of work in that, published a new methodology in 2024. And then the other one that we're excited about, and I'll touch on now, is irrigation upgrades. And so looking more at agricultural water use as obviously a thing that impacts nations across the wealth spectrum, and is very, very tied to water quantity issues, water quality issues, public health, you name it. And before I forget, so Verity is basically a spin out of CU Boulder. CU Boulder and a number of other partners put this together last year. It's called Decarbonizing Water. And it puts a lot of research into both the methodologies that are already out there on the voluntary carbon market, that have either as their central focus or as an adjacent benefit a water quality or water quantity outcome, but then also some project types that are kind of theoretical but probably should get a methodology at some point, and then quantifies that into the total climate benefit. And spoiler alert, it's very, very large. And I think that's kind of as a foundational focus for Verity, it's attacking that. It's water. Water markets, have a lot of value, especially with local stakeholders, because they feel strongly about water impacts that are happening to them. And carbon markets and carbon emissions can feel very esoteric to folks on the ground. You flip that around, obviously, and in the carbon market, there's often challenges in demonstrating that this carbon finance is turning into really good outcomes for folks on the ground. So for Verity, we're really continuing to push on the business thesis that combining carbon finance with water resiliency is good for both of those sectors, and ultimately those should be the same sector. So jumping, in a head-spinning way, we've heard a lot about wash projects. I'm going to jump over to irrigation. So irrigation globally is obviously a very, very large freshwater use. You probably know, given this is a climate-themed water conference, that rice alone accounts for almost 40% of the world's freshwater use and 10% of methane emissions. Ultimately, inefficient irrigation not only wastewater, it causes a lot of water quality issues due to runoff, but also, and in a fairly undercovered way, is responsible for a lot of climate emissions. And so essentially, when you have soils that are too wet for too long, they are going to create anoxic conditions without oxygen, and then when they dry out, they will release nitrous oxide, methane, other emissions like that. And those soils that are overly wet have a tough time developing carbon in the soil itself. And obviously, healthy soil has lots of carbon in it. So to attack that problem, and as I said, for Verity, it's diversifying our carbon finance water work. We've partnered with Netafim. So, they're on the second bullet, which is the world's largest drip irrigation, precision irrigation company. Over 4,000 staff, 110 countries, where they are already working. And I kind of have a map of, irrigation intensity. So, quite a few high-income countries and quite a few middle-income countries. As you get into the places where we're already doing a lot of drinking water work, there's a lot less irrigation. So it's not only for Verity an interesting diversification, but it's also moving us into new geographies where we otherwise wouldn't be working as much. So looking at Netafim, we're currently in discussions on a whole range of countries where this could make sense, but the place that we collectively started to focus on is Turkey. So this year, Verity and Netafim embarked on landowner recruitment and starting an irrigation upgrade project. And so we have a number of landowners already recruited, and we're basically doing a very extensive multi-year science project to demonstrate on the ground how many avoided emissions compared to baseline can be counted because of converting inefficient sprinkler irrigation all the way to drip irrigation. This is not using the gold standard. You've heard about the gold standard a couple times, which is one of the leading carbon registries. For this one, after looking through different options, we're going to use Vera, which is actually the preeminent, the largest registry, and their agricultural land management methodology. And so current state, we've got over 20 landowners. It's in the Konya province of Turkey. Just a hair less than 1,000 hectares is our very first kind of demonstration year. We've taken hundreds of soil samples just in the last couple months. We have 30 of these boxes out in fields, both fields that have sprinkler irrigation and fields that have drip irrigation. And we are taking basically air samples to send off to the lab to demonstrate the differences in nitrous oxide emissions between those different fields, the fields that have converted to more efficient irrigation and the ones that have not. And as you've heard, it's fairly complicated to start to attach these things to the carbon market. So we have a number of things upcoming. In the next couple of weeks, we will be registering that project with Verra. In the next 6 to 12 months, we will be calibrating a model with all of the data that we've brought in. And after a significant effort of calibrating that model so that it's actually getting us the results that we would expect, we can embark on validation, verification, ultimately credit generation, and then working with the government of Turkey to hopefully achieve what's called a letter of authorization that Turkey will not count these credits towards reaching its Article 6 goals. And so this is a lot, but I think what Verity sees, especially as a private company in a sector that doesn't have a lot of private companies pushing on these types of things, is that the opportunity is vast. Whether you're talking about drinking water, watershed restoration, irrigation upgrades, we hope, as do many, that carbon prices are going up, which will make all of these projects a lot more viable, including irrigation, and really help to accelerate and scale them. And there's just a massive opportunity, especially in these middle-income countries where it's cheaper to work than the EU or the United States. There's a lot of irrigation, a lot of food production, but a lot of that is fairly inefficient. And so if we can keep generating carbon credits, quantify the water quality and the water quantity benefits, and find corporate partners that care about the whole package as opposed to just the water or just the carbon, we think there's a bright future for this type of strategy. Great. I'm going to pass it down to John.
There you go.
Thank you, Alex. And one of the drawbacks of being last on a panel like this is most of the most insightful things have already been said. So you'll hear me referencing a lot of what my colleagues have said, hopefully in a way that isn't too redundant. For those of you who came in after the introductions, just quickly, my name is John Simon, and I'm not only a principal, but the managing partner of Total Impact Capital. And we're an impact-first investing firm that has been around for 15 years, focusing on increasing access, using finance to increase access to basic human needs. Ooh, the wrong way.
Big middle button.
Yes, which is now, oh, that's going back. There we go. So the first point I'll make is that carbon credits are a bit of the holy grail when it comes to impact investing. Throughout, in all the sectors we work, people are looking for ways to monetize the social benefits that come from doing a particular innovation, whether it's in health or education and housing. And all these things have incredible social benefits. But in all these areas, it's very tough to measure those social benefits in a way where a price can be put on them. That's not the case in the voluntary carbon market or the mandatory carbon market, where these credits will be sold. The good news is that over the last 30 years, there's been a whole methodology. Alex pointed out that Verity has been a big part of it. That's been developed to identify what is a price for the good that's being done by reducing emissions through water, and that's a huge value to what we're trying to do in terms of attracting investment into this sector and creating a vehicle that can mobilize significant amounts of capital. We're going to go into one of several of the challenges in a moment, but one challenge that Christina mentioned that I think is very key is this idea that carbon credits can be part of greenwashing. And there's sort of stories that have been told. Some of you may have watched the John Oliver episode of this about credits that were sold for forests that were never in danger. The good news about water is for a fact if you're buying a carbon credit that's a function of a water project, that at the very least someone's getting clean water. You also know that a certain amount of emissions are being reduced, and in many cases you also know that they're getting cleaner air because they're not boiling the water inside, and you're creating other social benefits from the fact that people have clean water. Like, for instance, women don't have to spend so much time gathering water, and therefore can spend their time in more productive uses. So there's a tremendous amount of positivity that we don't calculate when we calculate the benefits of carbon credits that are sold, that are underlying what we're trying to do. But one very important point of taking the approach we're taking is that attracting investment will be undermined if we don't have these high standards in place. And that's a big part of what we have to do in terms of creating a vehicle for carbon credits. Now, like this slide tells you all that you know. Unsafe water insecurity, carbon emissions, energy poverty. These are problems that we have to face in the globe. And to address just the water gap on this side, I think these numbers are pretty well established in this community, 130 to 140 billion a year. Now, carbon credits can't cover all of that. The total carbon credit market is estimated to be about 2.7 trillion by 2030. That would cover all of it, but not all of that's from water. A fraction of that's from water. About 1.6 billion is estimated over the next 10 years to come from water. Depending on that price, that could be anywhere from 200 billion to 300 billion in new revenues that can come into the sector. And by the way, those are very heavily new revenues, because we're seeing very little in terms of revenues today from carbon credits. So that's 200 to 300 billion, maybe more, that can help offset that pretty massive price tag. So this is, an important contributor potentially to a major problem. The problem, and this was referenced a little bit by Christina, a little bit more by Keith. Where do you get the money to finance the activities that have to happen, including all the work that has to be done to certify that these carbon credits are in fact valid? Organizations like Christina's or Keith's members, they're not rolling in cash, certainly not right now. And so the idea is to create a mechanism that can buy these carbon credits in advance before they're actually certified. The implementers can take that money, put them into the project, deliver clean water, get certified, and then the old vehicle can sell those credits for a profit and share those profits with the organizations. And that's the basic concept of what we're trying to do. And like I said, I mentioned some of these things before. Keith mentioned a lot of them. These are all the challenges to getting the financing. Part of what we're sort of saying is if we can aggregate a number of these projects together into one vehicle, we can set standards, we can reduce transaction costs, we can simplify the process, we can reduce the market fragmentation. On the point that Christina made, that the price fluctuates, if we aggregate the credits, we can hold the credits till the market, we don't have to sell them right away because we have we have financial wherewithal. We can hold the credits till we think it's the best time to sell them, and hopefully increase as much as possible the revenues that are coming from this. Well, I just said everything that this slide says, but this is the basic idea. A few other points is we were able to diversify the risk across a number of projects, yeah, everything else was what I just said. So you have this covered, and this is the critical point, is that if we're able to provide the financing up front, we create a virtuous cycle where the more that we generate through these projects, the more market acceptance there'll be, the more that the market finds these credits attractive, the more financing will mobilize, and the more of Keith's members and even other folks who are not yet a part of the Millennium Water Alliance, but hopefully will be at someday, will want to join this. And the more that we'll be able to set high standards to make sure that the credits that are produced actually deliver in terms of the social benefit we're trying to achieve. So I think that's it for me. Back to you, Alex.
All right, great. Well, that was the first half of our hour and a half, and would love to take a quick pause now. We threw a lot at you. There was a number of acronyms, and so certainly if there's any clarifying questions or early things coming to mind, now's a good time to ask them. We then are going to go into 20, 30 minutes of kind of facilitated panel discussion, and then you'll have a chance for more questions. So is there anyone online or in the room here? Looks like all the way up there, if you don't mind running a mic up. Really creating a workout, which is all good.
Thanks. I had a question at a high level for the long-term outlook of these credits. You were mentioning, obviously, on a deep dive of embedding these within the carbon credit framework. And I was curious if you saw a future for water-specific credits. So instead of it being in the voluntary carbon markets or marketed as carbon credits, having water credits being sold. Thanks.
Great. I'll jump on that one if that's cool with the panel. From Viridi's perspective, and we've had, myself included, a lot of experience in water-only markets. We're not against it. I think Viridi would be open to water credit opportunities, but what we're really hoping, given kind of the twin challenges of climate emissions and water issues, drought, flood, et cetera, is that we can bundle them together, right? And so, as I said, we'd be open to it as we go along if it's the right thing for the communities we're serving. But the ideal state is that the carbon markets strengthen, and that especially with monitoring technology, better models, big data analytics, that it becomes cheaper and easier to quantify those water quality and those water quantity benefits. And by continuing on this path, we essentially have a more and more valuable carbon credit, where the carbon credit itself may be at the global average, but then it is double the price because it's coming with a water credit attached to it, or a quantified water benefit attached to it. So that's the business thesis we're pushing on. It's a challenge. I mean, as folks know, I think a lot of the biggest corporations that are going after net zero carbon emissions and are active in the voluntary carbon market, a lot of them have water sustainability objectives as well. But generally speaking, not everywhere, but generally speaking, those carbon and water objectives are kind of siloed within the company, right? And so we've found that again and again. It is kind of the current state. And obviously water is a thing that often is, defined by a watershed where carbon is all kind of going to the same place, at least emissions wise. So there are some scientific challenges, but obviously the evolution of all these big companies, capitalism, et cetera, and all of the energy being burned for all of the things we're doing, has created these challenging water conditions. Not wholly, but a lot of these challenging water conditions are more challenging because of where we are vis-a-vis climate change. And so we think there's a solid argument, even for a company that, for example, isn't sourcing anything from Turkey, that they should care about a drought-ridden area in Turkey and irrigation conversion there, because they, in the global community of multinational corporations, have some small responsibility for the more challenging issues there. So that's the big idea. And water sustainability has its own challenges in scaling as well, and so it's not like we're passing up opportunities to sell water credits. We just think there's a really big opportunity down the road to combine the two and hopefully find corporates that kind of agree with that vision.
Alex, I want to make one more point, which, as I said at the outset of my little talk, people have been trying to find ways to create credits in health, credits in education, credits in a whole other areas where there are clear social benefits to interventions. The challenge is there isn't the infrastructure or the ironclad commitments that exist in carbon. And so what we're doing is we're building on that infrastructure, and as Alex said, we're also going to articulate all the other benefits you get from this. So hopefully, when people buy a water credit, they'll be buying not just the benefit from carbon, but the benefits from those other things. But they'll be able to know that at the very least, the price of that is not going to go below what a carbon credit would be.
Mm-hmm. Yes, right here.
Thank you. John, I think you had on one of your last slides was that view of the funding gap and what carbon credits can bring in. Can you talk a little bit about what you see the future of the market price-wise and the timeline for that and what the assumptions are on your calculation?
So I will say at the outset that, Alex and us share the view that over time, the price of carbon is going to go up. The price of a carbon credit is going to go up. If I could tell you exactly how much, and I could tell you exactly when, I would probably be the French Riviera right now enjoying my yacht instead of sitting here. But I do think that what we're seeing in the market, and Keith made the point that this is not a straight line, that there are soft periods, but that the emissions gap is only getting larger. And so the need for folks to find ways to close that gap is just going to grow. And while we're in a point in time where theoretically, and this is why I think we're in a soft market, it's not as politically popular as it used to be to tout what you're doing for the environment. You know, every day there's evidence of the problems that are being caused by what we're doing to the environment. And I think from a customer point of view, firms are going to have to answer for that, and they're going to look for ways to do that. And this is a very positive way to do that.
I'd also note it's a super interesting time right now after a couple of years that kind of have felt like doldrums in the voluntary carbon market, especially. There are all of a sudden in the last 6 months a lot of multinational agreements under Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement that are creating regional compliance markets that can source carbon credits from any nation that the compliance nation has an agreement with. And so the voluntary market is mostly what we've been talking about, and certainly it's not just John and I. Like, there's a lot of projection that as we get close to 2030, when a lot of climate commitments have been made, for that year, that the price will go up because supply will not meet demand. But also, there's these compliance markets starting up in the last 6 months, aviation, and then some different regions, the EU, Singapore, that are using methodologies originally constructed for the voluntary carbon market, but using it for compliance. And so we're seeing that, 4 or 5 times higher than the global average price in the voluntary carbon market already, right? And so again, as those keep hitting, and it's kind of hard to follow even for an entity that is fully in the carbon market, we expect it to kind of pull itself upward like that. Anyone else? I think I saw one over here. Yeah. This is great, by the way. Thank you so much for engaging.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for a super interesting presentation. I'm not from the topic. I'm an engineer, civil engineer, completely different. I have a little bit problems to understand where the credit points come from. Is they created within the project, and who is doing the certification, or however you call it then? Also, if you could explain a little bit the flow, let's say, also financial flow from the project, the credits, selling, coming back the money, maybe to the project, that would be nice. Maybe I missed it, so I'm completely new in this subject.
Great.
And no, you didn't miss it. We definitely didn't cover that. So my apologies. So I'll dive in, and then others can contribute if they feel I've missed something. And so Christina briefly mentioned the concept of suppressed demand. That is basically working on the assumption that the baseline would be boiling your water to provide yourself and your family with safe drinking water. And the idea is that by not having to boil your water through interventions that are being implemented, you are no longer having to burn biomass, which produces carbon emissions. And that's where the credit of 1 ton is 1 credit of carbon emissions is conceptualized. And so we, as the project developer, Helvetas as the project implementer, are working together to take organizations through the process of providing safe drinking water, monitoring how many people we're providing what volume of water over the course of a year, to calculate those carbon emissions by not having to boil water to have access to safe drinking water. And then Viridi in that partnership, or Viridi, is off-taking those credits, essentially purchasing them from Helvetas, pooling them together, holding onto them to then sell them. And so the implementer doesn't pay Viridi. Viridi buys the credits and then will sell them.
Who certifies this?
Oh, sorry. And the certification body that we're going through for the most part is the gold standard. But there are several certification bodies, and we have to hire a VVB, a validation and verification body, that is an external auditor that comes and looks at what we have implemented. We have to meet annual monitoring requirements. That's a random selection of where we've implemented. And then the auditor comes in, looks at that data, randomly visits from those that have already been randomly selected, to validate and verify that the data we've provided match what they are seeing on the ground. And then to verify the numbers that we've provided to then confirm the calculations that determines the credits that have been generated. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add the current arrangement for this umbrella approach. Verity, as the private company with the carbon market expertise, is essentially offering our services for free under an agreement that once we get 12, 18 months down the road, a carbon credit's been generated, we will buy that credit at a price certain that's fair, and then hopefully in aggregating them, finding willing buyers, we can make money on the turn that'll pay us back for all the time we spent. That's the current arrangement, but it does require patience, and it's obviously risk on Verity. And so, what John touched on, and he was probably too modest because he's already, Total Impact Capital has already raised tens of millions of dollars, if not over 100, with these types of debt finance concepts. What Verity would love to do in partnership with Total Impact Capital is find concessionary capital that wants all of this to go faster. So instead of waiting 12 to 18 months for us to have credits and only moving at the speed that Verity's cap table, Verity's investors can fund, with a debt instrument, we would be able to contract with not only our current partners, but hopefully a lot more partners across wash and irrigation and ecosystem restoration to basically scale and faster, right? By paying them up front for things that we know will generate credits 12 to 18 months down the road. Right, and so that's in my opinion, that's a really good use of concessionary capital. Slightly below market rate, and then if conservative projections on carbon prices are correct, you make the money back that you invested, and you can return that to the folks that made the loan. I saw another question here.
Thanks so much for this great discussion. I'm Elena Harkness from Current in Chicago. So we are thinking a lot about the explosive growth of data centers as a utility that naturally combines energy and water demands. And I've been interested that there hasn't been a huge presence so far at this particular conference of that kind of industry participation. So I'm just wondering if you could reflect on that, because it feels like a really interesting moment for water and energy demands to be hitting the ground locally in ways that could create more demand for these kind of combined enriched credits. And I wonder if there's others that we might be missing. That's obviously a mega trend. Thanks.
Yeah, so in answer to that original question, like I said, we do believe the trend is going to be upward. That's one of the biggest reasons. So there's a lot more energy demand based on AI and data centers. And many of those companies have already made commitments about how much carbon they're going to put into the world in the future, and if they're going to invest in these data centers, they're going to have to offset them with quite a big purchase.
And of course, in addition to the energy, is the use of water for cooling, which is huge. So without using brand names, we've actually had a meeting with one of those big players already who is asking us, hey, which of your members work in these countries? And it's more about nature-based solutions, kind of watershed restoration. One, to avoid criticism, but also just for business continuity. They need huge amounts of water for these data centers. So I'm aware that there are some good people in some of those big things trying to think about it and reaching out to our sector for expertise. So we'll see where that goes, but it's a huge, huge thing. It's only going to get bigger, right? But yeah, the use of water just for cooling is a big draw.
I have seen quite a few of those companies represented this year. I know they were here last year as well. There's a CEO water mandate. Many of those companies are represented there. I think what certainly this panel and others that we work with would love to see is really the combination of those water sustainability goals with the carbon goals. Yeah. Anybody else before we jump into more of a panel discussion? Great. Thank you so much. All right. So, I've probably spoken overly much on trying to jam those two things together, water and carbon. Why does the panel have any thoughts on why water has been historically underrepresented in climate finance?
It's hard.
I mean, I'll say just one thing. I think actually there are better people on the panel speak to this than I am. But you look at that 130 to 160 billion dollar financing gap for water, and I think as a general rule, and we're all here because we're trying to address this, water has been underinvested overall. That it's a. I mean, Keith made the point. It's a carbon finance complicated. Water's complicated, and what we see a lot of climate funds, they find it much more. Much easier to finance a renewable power project than a water project. And that part of that is the politics that are involved in water. Part of that is the fragmentation of the sector that was talked about. So I think it's not surprising too much that where in climate finance overall, water is underrepresented. It's also underrepresented in carbon finance. As I said, that 160 billion potential credits at this point, it's like 1% of that is being produced. So the good news is there's a huge opportunity for growth in this area, and that's where we see the opportunity to be part of it.
I'll just speak to one quick thing that John mentioned around just like fragmentation generally of the water sector as it relates to carbon, which has been one of the things that I'm plugging for that report that Alex held up a minute ago, kind of looks at the full landscape of what we're talking about when we're talking about the water sector. In this conversation, we just talked about basically drinking water and irrigation, but there's all these other opportunities as well, and also where carbon is being emitted within the water sector, including at wastewater treatment plants, huge amounts of carbon offsets there. Restoration, mangrove restoration. Help me out, who else was on this report? Any other sectors we want to name?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Untreated sewage is a big emitter,
yeah.
But then also the treatment itself is a big energy user, right, and chemical
Correct.
user. So sewage all around.
Yeah, so both energy needed by the utility, but then the whole wastewater cycle and how much energy is generated there. So I think it's really, it's just, we've had a hard time kind of thinking about all of these water things together as one. And when you start to actually put them all together, that's when you start to see that this is a huge sector. And that's when we start to see this 1.6 billion tons potential here. But when we just started really thinking about drinking water, 10 or 15 years ago, we were really this very, very niche sector. And so I think that's part of the story of why perhaps we're starting to be able to communicate a little bit better about this.
And I just note that water is heavy. It requires a lot of energy to move around the world. It requires a lot of energy to clean to different standards, and it's often expensive to do that. And as the volatility of the carbon markets kind of continue, if carbon prices are low, then there's not all that much you can do with water, right? At $5 a ton, I think it's challenging to say that you're making a difference with your carbon revenues. Hopefully, we all see $30, $40, $50 a ton as we, barrel along. And with those types of prices, a lot more can be done on the water side. So I think that's, from my perspective, a lot of water opportunities are just too expensive for current carbon market prices.
And one just ancillary thing I would add, this kind of happens at an inflection point where there's smaller already, lower investments by bilaterals than there have been for decades. So kind of this, as a sector, for those of us who care about these services to those who need it, we urgently need to think differently and quickly and at scale, because hitting the same button's not giving us the same peanut. So it just happens that, this conversation was started some years ago, but it's happening at a point where it's increasingly urgent to have alternative CapEx to scale these results and do it in a better way.
Yeah. And so certainly the three folks in the middle of the panel here are WASH experts. What do you see, as you're getting into carbon finance or fairly far along, what are some limitations of like the carbon market structures when it comes to water projects, and how do you navigate those?
I'll start with one example, and there are a lot of details, right? So you kind of think, wow, this looks interesting, and then you get into it, and again, being required to prove safe water availability at the point of consumption, and I'll just say we and collectively haven't thought rigorously about that level of water quality in a lot of our past work. So all of a sudden you're thinking about treatment. How do you actually treat water in a way that guarantees that result and that you can sustain over 15 years without grant funding? So it requires a different thinking and design, different thinking about technology, what treatment methods for what project designs, the role of sensors. So it's making us think at a design level differently than we've had to. And not just about building a beautiful project, but how do you sustain that intervention? What are the maintenance requirements? What's the supply chain for that treatment component? So and that to me is a very healthy thing, but it's requiring a level of rigor and long-term thinking that 3 to 5 year project cycles didn't require.
And I think Christina did a great job of highlighting many of the challenges and limitations, but I do just want to highlight, again, timeline and scale. But then moving beyond that and thinking about how we're working with partners, how we're seeing that it's making all of us step up to meet the reporting requirements, really like leveling up to go all the way down to point of consumption, which we all know from a public health perspective is what matters, but we don't get funding to monitor that at scale over a long period of time, and that's being required by the gold standard and other bodies. And then just thinking about how when bad actors in other related sectors come on the news and make people question the credibility of the credits that are being generated in the water space, it's incredibly frustrating to know the extent to which we are having to exceed what even high standards our sector has already set and have it undermined by other sectors in climate finance just is continues to kind of set us back and is making some of these bodies kind of react and restrict even further the credits that can be generated in a way that they're trying to increase credibility but are actually decreasing feasibility. And I will step off my soapbox there.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate again the point that this is one of the reasons why Helvetas has decided not to just do this in-house ourselves. There is, even with working with the program development, we still have to make investments, and a lot of those are there is a whole new survey that you have to implement as part of this. It's not the same survey that you do for all of your water projects. All of that stuff is included also, but there is another level of questions that you have to include, and so you have more training, you have more resources that are put into that. You have to do point of consumption water quality testing. That takes a long time. It requires a lot of logistics on the ground. And so, again, we're implementing this over the past 6 months with our team in Madagascar, and we're going through these kind of iterations of what's new, what surveying methodology is needed. And then the other point that I would make is, depending on how these programs operate, all of our programs operate entirely differently. The Rwanda program is water filters at school. You all are doing groundwater? No, sorry.
Solarized pumping inline.
Solar pumping inline in Kenya, and in Madagascar we work with private service operators. These are all extremely different models. And so there's a learning curve from a program developer perspective on figuring out what all of those projects look like, but also how are we sharing revenue? This has been a big topic on our project because our projects are co-owned and co-financed by private operators, Malagasy private operators. They do have an upside on the revenue as well with us, but how does that all work? There's a lot of stakeholder work that goes into a lot of that. So there is another level of complexity that gets introduced to these programs. And for example, that last piece I don't think is bad. I think it's really great. It's a big incentive, but you have to be willing to kind of lean into we all know water projects are already super complex. It's another layer of complexity onto them.
Great. John, would love a little bit more, because this is not your first rodeo in terms of raising and deploying capital for public health and environmental benefits. So what have you learned along the way, and how does that attach to what opportunities we're seeing with these projects?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of ways that we approach raising capital that are different from the way you would think about traditionally raising capital that are critical. One is track record is critical, and I think that's true. No, that's not different from how most people raise capital. They really need, people rely on what they see in terms of the evidence of performance already. But for the type of capital we're looking to raise here, it's not just about financial performance, it's about impact performance. And I think what's great about working with Millennium Water Alliance and Keith and all the members there, and obviously Helvetas and the others, is that they have a track record. Now, not necessarily a track record of producing carbon credits, but a track record of producing impact and producing water. And then the idea is that by bringing Verity into the mix, they're able to show that those activities can lead to the carbon credits. So track record is critical, particularly on the impact side. I think the point that a lot of the investors we're talking to will be looking to is, what do the communities get out of this? And I think all of you have programs that take the funds that you are generating and reinvest in the communities. And I think that's pretty essential in terms of getting impact investors to say that this is something worth providing below market financing. And then a big issue is how do you show that you have risk mitigants in place? And a lot of that is, again, based on your history, based on what you've been able to do already, and based on how we're going to structure the capital with some risk bearing capital at the front end that will absorb any losses if there are losses. The last point I'd make that I think is very exciting about the way we're structuring this is that there's tremendous benefits to scale in this particular area relative to anything else. I mean, the fact that you create a mechanism that can hold on to the credits until the market is right is something that creates a huge amount of value just in that one area that doesn't exist. The fact that we can set those high standards and make sure that we're not being undermined through as Christina said, greenwashing, I think is vital. And then all those costs that Christina mentioned, I mean, those are extra costs that any entity that's doing this has to add on. If we can reduce those through economies of scale, that's going to make a big difference. So I think that's the other element that we want to be able to emphasize is that there's real returns to scale by creating a mechanism of this sort.
Great, thank you. One that I think everybody probably has a perspective on. Even in a world where Verity or other for-profit actors are making it easier and easier to generate carbon credits from water resiliency projects, there's a whole ecosystem of other actors that necessarily are a part of this. So would love to hear not only in your experience how governments are already a part of this, like what role do governments play, what role do donors, or foundations play, corporate buyers, where are they playing now, and then if you'd like to riff a bit, what is a better future, right? Where can governments, donors, corporate credit buyers really help out in new ways going forward?
I think I'll just start by speaking briefly to governments and just recognizing that to achieve the scale that's necessary for all of our projects, having the government as a central actor is key to be able to reach that scale. We have no interest in working extra governmentally. We truly want to enter into partnership with the government, as we have in Rwanda, with agreements with the Ministry of Education and other entities there. And so just really thinking about how to partner with and motivate the government to buy into this has been a critical part of thinking about their role, and again, not undermining their responsibility to their citizens or their ability to meet their citizens' needs.
And there's a necessary early step too, right, of the
LOA.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think on this point, Alex, there is an opportunity here to really, like you say, envision a very different world than what we have today. I mean, we're facing a point where the old model of relying on large amounts of official development assistance really is not something that people can think of. And so I think there are three, probably more, but three critical elements of how we have to think about the world going forward. One, we have to think about governments taking ownership of their own development, not relying on a lot of support from outside agencies, and because of the central role governments play in this type of model, that is a requirement. Two, we have to think about sustainable models that don't rely on a constantly a regular amount of grant or philanthropic money coming in. And again, this model relies on creating a product, a reduction in carbon, that actually has a price that people are willing to pay. And three, and this gets to the vision that I think was sketched out by Alex before, which I think is a very exciting vision. If we can build on the carbon credit infrastructure to add in the value created by all these interventions around health, around job creation, around reduced time for women and women empowerment, I think we're able to create a vision where people can actually buy into making the world a better place. And that I think is the type of development model that I think will hopefully be what we can see in the next 5-10 years.
And I think just to, again, use that ecosystem of donors kind of analogy here, like, I think that is a big opportunity. This doesn't really exist yet, but, donors, foundations have like very specifically what they work on. They have a mission that they speak to, and that is not always this holistic work that we all do in the water, in this work, especially with drinking water. And so a lot more people kind of buying into this like ecosystem idea where carbon finance can possibly fill one of these funding gaps around maintenance or sustainability, and perhaps you have another funder that is really focused on capital costs. And I think, again, there's this opportunity, instead of saying X funder is bad because they only fund one thing, that you can create, this is another opportunity to create an ecosystem of donors that can work together. In theory, that's where we're not yet, is all of these different types of funders coming together to create this ecosystem. But I think that is one of the opportunities where, from my perspective, one of the main gaps in that ecosystem is long-term financing, is maintenance financing, and this provides some way to fill that gap. And I think I hope, I guess my wish is that some of those donors that are restricted by some of this capital intensive giving start to say, like, okay, maybe we can partner on this work. Maybe we can think about our donor dollars in a different way. And if we start to partner with this carbon credits program, then we can create a holistic financing model for those programs. So that's kind of how we're trying to think about this at Helvetas. And because, again, we struggle with pretty solid on getting people to fund a literal water point, but it's really hard to get funders oftentimes past those 1-year cycles. We've talked about this for years now, and this might, be able to help us fill that gap.
Yeah, and related to that, with those, when you look at the initial CapEx investments or system builds, when that was the primary investment and that was the start and end of it, that seems very limiting. But when you add this mechanism alongside that, even relatively short-term fixed investments on CapEx with this model have a very different optic. It's like, hey, if we put $2 million into this number of systems, then you have 15 years of revenue that keep them running. I would imagine if I were a donor, like, that's a very different optic.
Totally.
My money's now being leveraged in a way. And in terms of ecosystems, which is a great word, one of the things we're working on now is, as the revenue comes back, to John's point about investing in communities, what's that business ecosystem look like that keeps those systems running? That's not necessarily, probably shouldn't be INGOs holding that money and sending out repair teams, right? It's using sensor data to have contracts with local service providers, but putting cash into that system, which generates a whole nother economy around delivering these services, which has been stunted.
I'd just add, certainly donors of size, whether those are foundations or big family offices, often have investment portfolios that are many times bigger than the philanthropy every year. So it's not. There are some great examples that some folks probably do know, but certainly a future that we would love is, as the carbon market hopefully strengthens, demonstrates that it's on the upward trajectory that's long been expected, that the investment side of a lot of these donors sees that the investment is fairly low risk and can basically come in with program-related investments, concessionary capital, and that's very different than their traditional philanthropy. And then government. I think I mentioned this. The Singapore compliance market a couple months ago has got a bunch of renewed focus on, for example, water projects in Rwanda, because Singapore and Rwanda hammered out a bilateral Article 6.2 agreement. And so, we've worked at Verity, and many of these partners have worked with a lot of these African countries. We certainly need their support to give letters of authorization for these programs. But then also, other countries outside of Africa can have a huge impact on the eventual credit price by authorizing and supporting these types of carbon credits to be used in their new compliance markets. We got about 15 minutes, a little bit less, and so want to take another break back for audience questions. So we've got 5-10 minutes, and then we'll close out. So are there any further questions from the crowd? Easy enough. it's probably cocktail time. All right. Well, we'll go down the panel then with kind of last word. What did you hear that was different? What are you thinking about? What do you think a bright future looks like? Feel free to go freewheeling on this one, Laura.
Freewheeling. Freewheeling. Let's go. Sorry, I spend a lot of my time thinking about this, so to think like what I want to, even though I was warned that I needed to do this. So as a project developer, Viridi brings a lot of expertise, but I will say it has been a learning journey for myself to go from kind of an expert in water and sanitation, thinking about how to implement large-scale projects, thinking about quality assurance and quality control. And so it's been a really exciting space to think outside of one project and how we can work together across organizations under this umbrella to bring together high-quality water projects. At the same time, as Christina pointed out, each of the projects we're working on is different, and there's one methodology that applies to all of them. And so there is this give and take of understanding the methodology and how it pushes us to be better while also pushing back to ensure that what is being asked of us is feasible and does allow us to continue to provide access to safe drinking water. And so I think that's just a tension that I balance every day and thinking about the research side, the implementation side, and how to support the collaborators we're working with who are also implementers, is just like working in this space to build and maintain credibility while also making sure that we're not making it impossible for us to move forward. And so like I'm incredibly excited about working in this space. I can't believe I've been doing it for several years now. Time flies when you're having fun. But at the same time, it's not something that I recommend to everyone. It's not something that I love every day. And it really pushes us to think like, how can we do this better? But also how can we push back and think about ensuring that it is possible for this to move forward and that there's a future in it.
Yeah, my comment would be similar to Laura's in that going it alone on this stuff is brutal. There's a lot to figure out. So we're delighted to have Viridi to kind of be the experts and then know what we know and kind of triangulate that. So even as we kind of scope out other member projects, I mean, I think it's important to quickly get to a maybe versus pay tons of money to advisors to get you to a definitive yes or no in a year. So I think that's kind of, there's an urgency to scale and move and bring this together. So I think it's that moving forward together is really an opportunity. Most of us in this room are really good at doing the work and having an expert who can kind of help us triangulate that to see what are opportunities and what's not, right? And getting to a no quickly is much better than an expensive no later. So it's just kind of, yeah, moving forward together. Again, there's a technical working group on climate finance, which anyone in here would be welcome to join. Ask me for information on that. But we want to work together on this and move forward together on this to get the kind of scale that makes this all work.
Cool, and I'll make a point that kind of adds to that, but what I was speaking to in my presentation, which was like, don't underestimate the internal politics of this work. I think just for those of you who are thinking about this, in line with this isn't for everybody, but also there's just a lot of internal feelings about a lot of this work that has to be considered, and a lot of it comes down to general internal communication and how to do it well, including what Keith was just mentioning around one of the big pieces of credibility that I have within Helvetas is this is a big consortium of folks that are doing this. We're not just like going out on our own and deciding that this is a good idea. We have a product developer taking on some of that risk. We have a whole consortium of MWA implementers that are working on that. I was able to bring in outsiders to talk people through carbon credits and how it's working in other sectors and perhaps speak to some of their worries about it. But it did take us a good, Lord, 6 to 9 months to really convince folks at Helvetas that this was, something worth pursuing and taking a little bit of risk in trying on. So I would say it's something that again, don't overestimate what it takes to enter any new sector, but I think there's a lot of baggage in this sector overall. So to be able to think about that in that whole view of buy-in.
Yeah. Well, I would just end to point out that we're sort of at a moment in time where this type of mechanism really has the potential to make a real difference. And so the upside opportunity we're facing is quite incredible. I mean, we now have a carbon financing infrastructure that's been tested. It's had some ups and downs, but we it's still here and it's still working. It's, as Alex mentioned, expanding as the voluntary credit market also has opportunities to move into the mandatory credit market as governments become more aware of the opportunity, as we have the technology to do the monitoring much more efficiently than we had, and as some of the audience sort of pointed out, the demand for water and energy is only going to grow, and so the need to offset it is only going to grow. And so, what I would say to everyone here and everyone online, we don't want to miss this opportunity. We really want to sort of put our shoulders to the wheel and make sure we build the mechanisms that can unlock that, hundreds of billions of dollars that we need to meet the water goals we've all committed to.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to put my own fine point on that, we haven't touched on it much, but you probably have seen it and heard it elsewhere. We've all experienced the rapid disassembly of the biggest aid funder, in history. Now would be a very good time for private capital to step into the breach, right? We as a collective, we see a big benefit of applying more and more climate funds to WASH, and certainly at a time when a lot of the folks putting this work on the ground are hurting from those sources of funds disappearing. I'd say the other thing I'd touch on, and I hit this very lightly, but Viridi is also a technology company, and that was by necessity. When you come to terms with kind of the high standards for proving that the benefits are real, then you start working pretty hard on what are some technology options that radically decrease the cost of proving the outcomes that we want. So for WASH, that is the water clean, and is it being used? In irrigation, obviously that's avoided emissions, that's increased soil carbon, that's reduced runoff, reduced water usage. Ecosystem restoration, right? That's in-stream water quality improvements, that's sequestration by trees and wetlands. So all of those things, have long been required, but the technology to monitor and prove out those is getting cheaper and cheaper dramatically fast, right? And so I guess it's a good outcome. I would say it's a much better outcome than ubiquitous large language models that you can chat with. Another application of that is big data analytics, predicting environmental and social benefits is better than it's ever been. It's cheaper than it's ever been, and obviously the trajectory is that's gonna continue. So that, I think, gives me a lot of confidence that the transparency and the quantification is only going to improve for these projects. And the more that happens, I think that will create more confidence in investing in carbon credits. So we're certainly excited by that. A couple of things to leave you with. Let's see. So Viridi has a booth down on the second floor. Maybe you've seen it already. We'd love to chat with you. We're mainly talking about our water sensor technology, but certainly any follow-up questions we can take there. Keith is on a panel on Thursday morning at 9 a.m. with some other MWA members that are also going after carbon finance for these WASH projects at a slightly smaller scale. So if you're interested in 50,000 people is a little bit out of our league. There's a whole other group of folks that are trying to use the same methodology and very similar mechanisms to do this, for smaller project developers. So hopefully you can check that out. A couple of us are going to be on a panel tomorrow at 4 p.m. I think in A2 on a lot of the water quality monitoring technologies out there, both that Viridi offers, but kind of a huge spectrum outside of what we use, and the rapid improvement of those and a lot of applications both in developed and developing world areas. And then lastly, if you are interested in kind of the research big dive on, on the opportunity here, please grab a Decarbonizing Water report. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great World Water Week. Thank you.